Yes, we can start, Tausif.
Okay. All right. So welcome everyone. We'll get started with this live session. So as usual, we will discuss the assignment, the quiz that we just had. But what I will also do is from now on, some of these problems are going to get a little bit more challenging. So at the back end of this session, we will also preview some of the tricky aspects of the next assignment that's out for you, right? I mean, I'm not going to answer the questions, give specific answers to questions. I want you to think about them, but I will give some guidance on how to solve these problems, right? Um, okay, so most of quiz 3, I mean, the third week's assignment, most of it was focused on, understanding code. This particular question was just simply tracing the code. There's some function that's given. We're calling that function on some inputs, and we just have to see if how the function will behave on these inputs. So if I give it the input 0, 0, 0, of course, here we have to remember that the first two zeros are integers, and then the last one is the float. The question is the sum of integer 0 plus integer 0 equal to the floating point value 0.0, right? And intuitively, it seems correct, but you should always feel free, while you're answering these questions. In fact, I want you to encourage you to make a guess, like maybe you think the answer is true, or for some reason, maybe you think the answer is false, but then open up a REPL, right? And try it out. What is integer 0 plus integer 0? I mean, obviously, integer 0 plus integer 0 is the integer 0, but is that equal to the floating point value 0.0? You can test this out, and this will tell you it's true, right? Another way you could do it is you could even just write this function out in the REPL, right? You might have to write it one line at a time, and then you can call this function on these arguments and see what it produces, right? That would be the best way of doing it, right? Or you can do these more limited experiments, right? So the question was, which of these evaluated true? Clearly, the first one evaluates to true. In the second case, I've got the float value 0.5. Remember, one true division, two is the float value 0.5. So 0.5 plus 0.5, is that equal to the integer 1? Right? You could do an experiment like this, or you could write 0.5. It comes to the same thing. And once again, 0.5 plus 0.5 is equal to the integer 1, right? The true division, I mean, the floor division, of course, is not going to produce that, because one floor division 2 is, of course, going to give you the value 0. So that's not true. This one, of course, is empty string. So empty string plus empty string is equal to empty string, right? Remember, here we haven't said anything about the types of X, Y, and Z. These are just these parameters can be attached to arguments of any type. So you can give it strings, you can give it floats, you can give it ints, anything you like. And for example, if X is the empty string and Y is the empty string, then the sum of the empty string plus the empty string is equal to the empty string, right? The tricky one was this one, right? Again, you can try it out. And we know why it's producing the value false, even though 0.1 plus 2 times 0.1 should be 3 times 0.1, which is 0.3. But we know why this is happening. Somebody has their mic open. Can I request whoever has their mic open to be on mute, please? Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. Okay. So I hope this made sense, right? Why these are the only correct answers, right? And again, please experiment in the REPL. Use whatever tools are available. These questions are not simply designed to uh, it's something that you can necessarily work out in your head. Obviously, those of you who are registered for the exam will not be computer based, in the sense that you will not have access to the REPL or not have access to these other tools. You will take the exam, however NPTEL gives you the exam, but those will be like, say, multi-select, multi-choice, or in some cases, short answer questions. But you won't have access to the REPL. So there, the questions won't expect you to have access to the REPL. But here, while you're understanding, please use whatever tools are there. But my strong suggestion is first try and make a guess. And then if when you do the experiment on the REPL or you do the experiment, let's say using Python tutor, if there's something surprises you, then that is a good opportunity to learn and say, oh, wait, well, why did I think that was the right answer? So what have I misunderstood, right? So please treat these assignments as a learning opportunity. Okay. All right. So I hope the first question was clear. Let me know in case it was not, right? Okay, then there's a whole bunch of questions where, in addition to trying to understand the code, like what is the code doing, we also want you to be able to read some amount of technical documentation. In this case, it was just like Wikipedia articles, but some other questions might show you, give you some, say, Python documentation or something else, right? Okay. Um, Okay. Uh, Sanya is saying that the week 4 assignment was also on 10/9. Okay, that is a mistake. Um, so NPTEL team it may be that we made a mistake in the deadline for assignment 4. Can we please extend that to next week, right? That may have been my mistake. Apologies. So I think we still have another week for that. So NPTEL team, can we just please make a note of the request that just can we make sure that the assignment 4 deadline is as it is, right? Okay, no, someone has pointed out, Chaitanya has pointed out the due date is 17th. So that's what I thought I had set it to. Sanya, please double check if that makes sense. You can just put an acknowledgement on the chat. But these kinds of things, if it's happened, if it's our fault, definitely we will fix. Okay. So all right, so in this case we wanted you to read this Wikipedia article. Here is the relevant portion of that Wikipedia article. If you read it, is this. So 1 calorie is 4.184 joules. That is what the documentation is saying. Now, what are we doing here? We are taking some value. We don't know if this is calories or joules, but we're dividing it by 4.184, right? So we want you to be able to say, what is the code doing? What is the documentation telling me? Now, based on that, am I converting calorie into joules or joules into calories or something else, right? So in this case, it takes a little bit of effort to read this carefully and convince yourself that we must be converting joules into calories, right? If we had to convert calorie into joules, we'll be taking the calorie value and multiplying it with 4.184. Since we can read that the code is doing division, then it must be doing joules to calories, right? So amongst these choices, that would be sensible, right? Now, if you read further, it could also have been converting kilojoules to kilocalories, right? But you notice that that was not an option that was made available here. So amongst the options that are available, this would make sense, right? But the same function would also work to convert kilojoules into kilocalories, right? So I hope the idea of the question would make sense. Now, again, just to assure you, those of you who would be taking the exam, right? If I was to ask a similar question, I wouldn't be expecting you to be able to browse Wikipedia using the exam environment that NPTEL has. So there, all the relevant information would be provided in the question, right? Here, I literally wanted you to, go look up some documentation. Of course, these Wikipedia articles are super long, right? So part of it is like, okay, what am I looking for, right? I'm looking for some relation involving this number 4.184. Where in this article are people talking about this 4.184? I have to read it, right? So again, this is like, as a programmer, you will look at something and say, okay, what is going on here? I don't know anything about this. This is something involving thermodynamics, etc. I don't know anything about it. Fine, but there are technical documentations available. you should be able to take a look at it and read it, right? So hopefully that sort of makes sense, right? Okay, NPTEL team, thank you for confirming that the due date has been set correctly. Good, so I didn't make that mistake while creating it. So please take a look, and we'll preview assignment 4 as well. Okay. All right, so I hope this question made sense, right? The next question I think is similar. Again, we're reading the code and trying to compare it to some technical documentation. Here again, we're doing some formula, right? So we would have to read inside that Wikipedia article on body mass index, there is some formula, right? So there are two ways of calculating BMI. If the weight is given in kg and the height is given in meters square, I mean, height is given in meters, then we just take the weight, the mass divided by the height square. Or if the weight is given in pounds and the height is given in inches, then we also have to multiply with this scaling factor of 703. Okay. Okay. Chaitanya was mentioning that something was covered in lectures. Chaitanya, I'm not sure exactly what you meant. This particular question, was it? Okay, I see. Okay, fine. Okay. Um, all right. Yeah. So I think there was this video about where I think we used Chat GPT, right, to solve this particular problem, right, using the BMI thing. Yeah. 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 Good. Thanks. Yeah. All right. So good. It was similar from the lecture, so it should have been easy. So maybe I won't spend so much time on that. Maybe just point out that in this case, this is actually a helpful suggestion. Why? Because okay, in this case, what the friend is suggesting or somebody is suggesting is that we should use extra brackets, right? Instead of just writing it x divided by y square times 703, right? If you remember your order of precedence, then the most powerful operator is the exponentiation. So then there is no need to put these brackets, right? Definitely y square will happen first. And by the way, amongst the true division and the multiplication, the leftmost operator will happen. So in fact, the expression will be evaluated exactly as these brackets are saying. They're not adding any new information, but it definitely makes it much clearer to read, right? It's much easier to process this, right? So I hope this makes sense. Why in this particular option, it is a helpful suggestion. It is not a strictly necessary change. There is nothing wrong from a Python perspective leaving it like this, right? And again, just to repeat it one more time, why is it okay? Because we know from when we studied the different operators, the order of precedence, we said amongst the operators here, the true division, exponentiation, and multiplication, we said Python treats exponentiation as the highest precedence, the most powerful operator. So it actually does do y square first. Then amongst division and multiplication, it goes left to right. Right. So there was a question someone asked me to repeat. I hope that is the correct one. I hope I was repeating what you wanted. Right. Okay, and then amongst the choices of the function in name, we have said we don't like capital letters and as far as possible in this what we call camel case. In Python, we don't prefer it, so that's why that is the best name, right? And then the question of did we want the mass to be in pounds or kg and the height to be in meters or inches? Well, that depends. You read the code, you see this multiplication factor, so it must be that we wanted this, right? Whoever wrote this code should have been thinking of mass in pounds and height in inches, right? If they've got that thing. So it would have been better to use those names to make it very clear. Okay. All right. So again, look out for such questions where some code is given and you look at the code. I want you to be able to read the code and say, okay, this is what the programmer was thinking, right? Or if AI produces the code, okay, this is what the AI was thinking. Now, what do I really want? Maybe that is correct, or maybe that is not correct. So that's how we can read the code and compare it to what we really want to do, right? In this case, we're reading some technical documentation to understand what it is that we want. Okay. All right. Here is a a Python function, and this is now just code comprehension, right? It does something. We have no idea what it's supposed to do. It's got a very lousy name. It's just called f. There is no doc string explaining to us what it's supposed to do, but we can read the code, right? So this is purely code comprehension, and it's simply asking you, okay, based on what you think the code is doing, right? What is the most appropriate name for the function, right? So already we can rule out some options, right? We know we don't like capital letters, right? So let's rule out absolute difference, right? Can someone tell me why this first choice should also be ruled out? Why should we not call this function abs? Maybe it's doing something like absolute value, right? But why should we not call this function abs, right? Chaitanya has almost got it right, saying it's a keyword in Python. It's not quite a keyword, Chaitanya, but it's a built-in function, right? But your thinking is absolutely correct. In Python, the word abs already means something, right? So somebody has created a function called abs. Am I not audible? I hope I'm audible. Maybe Nagalakshmi, you can check your audio. Can you hear me? And can someone just confirm? Yeah, thank you. All right. So abs is a built-in function in Python. And so if you name your own function abs, then you won't have access to the built-in function. It would always call this one, right? So although this obeys the rules we have said, lowercase letters and so on, so we can rule out this, and we can rule out absolute difference with a capital A and capital D. So now we're just focused on, gap between and number of integers between, and both of these sound similar. So how do you decide which one, right? So remember, the code does something. And the ideal way I want you to figure out what it does is, okay, read it and say, oh, this is what it does. And based on what you understand what it does, maybe it's very obvious one of these is right and one of these is wrong. But if it's not obvious, please remember, you have one more way of figuring it out, right? As I said, the code is doing something and you're trying to read it and say, oh, what does it do in general, right? But there is a simpler way of trying to understand what the code does. Try it on some inputs, right? You give a value of X and you give a value of Y, and then you trace the logic. So you do code tracing and you say, oh, on this input, it does this. On this input, it does that. So then I can think about what it does in general, right? So right now we have said, is it the gap between X and Y, or is it the number of integers between X and Y? Which of these is the right interpretation, right? So let's try this on some values, right? So I'm going to try and comprehend the code by using my ability to trace through the code. I will simply trace the code on some inputs, right? So this is like code comprehension by example. I'm not trying to understand what the code does in general. I'm trying it on some examples and saying, on this example, what does it do? On this example, what does it do, right? So for example, I run it on, let's say, simple inputs like X is 0 and Y is 0, right? What does this function do if you give X equal to 0, Y equal to 0, right? Well, firstly, we check if X is equal to Y. Of course, it's equal in this case. So we return 0. So we know that this function returns 0, right? So what is the gap between 0 and 0? Well, the gap between 0 and 0 is 0. So that makes sense, right? How many integers are between 0 and 0? There are no integers between 0 and 0. So that also makes sense, right? This function could be gap between, or it could be num integers between. This example is not giving us enough information, right? But we could try another example, right? So let's try another simple example. How about 0 and 1? So X is not equal to Y, but X is less than Y, right? So we know how to trace the code. We know how if works. We know how elif works. We know that if the condition was true, immediately we'll be returning from the function. But here the condition X equal to Y is not true. So we must be coming to the elif case. Then X is less than Y in this case. And so we will return Y minus X. So we will return 1 minus 0. So we must be returning 1, right? Now, is the gap between 0 and 1 equal to 1? Yeah. Does that seem correct? Yeah, I mean, you can imagine the gap between 0 and 1 is 1. Is the number of integers between 0 and 1 1? No, there are no integers between 0 and 1, right? I mean, between 0 and 1, there are only fractions, point something, right? There are no integers in between. So now that we've tried this example and we know that it produces 1, now we can rule out num integers between. That doesn't seem like a good name, right? On this, if it really was num integers between, then why would it say that there is one integer between 0 and 1? There are no integers between 0 and 1, right? So what are we demonstrating here, right? Why am I asking you this question, right? The skill, as I said, I want you to be able to tell me is, I want you to be able to tell me, what is this function trying to do? Okay. And rather than having you type in some long answer, I'm asking you in a very simple way, just give me an appropriate name for this function. Okay, so in a very crisp way, I'm testing your understanding of what this function does. So the most important point I want you to take away from this question is that if you're trying to figure out what code does, the first thing you might want to try is read it. Can I figure out what it's doing? But please don't forget, you can always use this trick. You can always trace through it on some known inputs, right? You have to pick some inputs. And if you just pick some very special cases, you may not figure out what the function is doing. But if you trace through a few different sets of inputs, you can use this, and by example, you can try and figure out what the code does in general. This is a very powerful technique. So please don't forget that. I want everybody to be clear about that, right? Okay, Samadrit wants to know what if instead of int, float had been used as arguments, right? Right. So now if it was floats, right, now it's not so obvious, right? I mean, firstly, it still couldn't be num integers in between, right? Because, for example, if you just said x was int and x was float and y was float, then on the values 0.0 and 1.0, this code would still return 1.0. Right, and so there's 1.0 integers in between 0 and 1. That doesn't really make sense, right? So this would kind of be incorrect, right? Also, if you think about it, you know, um, so if you're taking floats, right, then the difference need not even be an integer. 1.0 is a float, but it's also the integer value 1, right? So in that case, anything that is like num or count or something like that, number of integers, that answer can't be a float, right? That doesn't make sense to say there's 3.7 integers between this value and this value, right? The number of integers between two values will either be 3 or 4, right? Okay, someone has their hand raised. Please, you can go ahead and ask. You can either put on the chat, or if you can unmute yourself, right? So I hope it was clear, Samadrit, why float, in the case of float also, the gap between would have been, a better name, right? Chaitanya wants to know, what if another option was absolute difference spelled the way Python programmers like it? And then, of course, that would be a sensible name too. Right. And as you can see, I didn't give you that option, so that in this case, there was only one option. If it was one of those multi-select ones, then you could have also selected absolute difference. I don't see a simple reason to choose gap between better than absolute difference, or absolute difference better than gap between. In my mind, both of those are sensible, right? So I will try and design the question so that either there's very obviously one answer, or genuinely there can be multiple answers, maybe for slightly different reasons, right? But these are good questions, right? Someone had their hand raised. If you would like to ask the question in the chat, I'd be happy to answer in the chat, or if you can unmute yourself, I'll be happy to answer that way as well. Okay, right? Yeah. So Chaitanya is saying, I fell for the trick. I forgot to check the question as name. Yeah. So again, please keep in mind the big skill, right? The big skill that we're trying to get over here is somebody's given us some code, right? In the real world, hopefully no one is going to call the function f, right? But they may have chosen a poor name, right? So just reading the name, you might think, oh, this is what the function does. Then you read the code and you say, really? does it really do this? Suppose this function was called num integers between, right? Someone chose a bad name, your friend chose a bad name, or your AI chose a bad name. Then you start reading this code and saying, does it really count the number of integers between? And then you try some input like this and say, no, this is a rubbish name, right? This is a bad name. Then you can go and change the name to say absolute difference or gap between or something like that, right? So you are demonstrating that you can understand the code, right? Now, if the person who wanted the write the code, they really wanted to count the number of integers between, then the code is wrong, right? The name is fine, but the code is wrong, right? So at least we have demonstrated that whatever the code is, we have understood it. It may be the correct code, it may be the wrong code, but we are demonstrating our understanding of the code, our comprehension of the code, right? So just like we learn how to read a natural language, we have to learn how to read code. We have to comprehend it, right? Again, those who have their hands raised, please do ask your questions, but I don't think I can hear you. So maybe the audio is disabled. Please do ask questions in the chat. Yeah, we're happy to try and answer. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, the next question relied on this very important notion of short circuiting, right? So the lecture explained it. The lecture gave an example where we were dealing with the AND operator, but a similar idea works with the OR operator. So the lecture gave an example with AND. The question on the assignment gave an example with OR, right? So the key thing in both cases is as soon as you know what the answer is, you stop evaluating it, right? So let's look at it, remind ourselves what we're doing. So AND and OR in regular Boolean algebra, as it's called, dealing with true false values. It doesn't matter if you say A or B, that's the same as B or A. It doesn't matter if you say A and B or B and A, they're exactly the same, right? But because this is not mathematics, this is code, here the order matters. And the lecture explained why between these two, we would actually prefer this, right? Suppose M was 0. This condition would be false, and false and anything is going to be false, right? So false and anything is false. So as soon as we have figured out this is false, we stop. The evaluation stops as soon as the outcome is determined, right? So as soon as we know this condition is false, we don't do this. And it's good that we don't do this because trying to divide by 0, if m was really 0, trying to divide by 0 is going to give you an error, right? So this would have been a disaster, right? If we did it this way and m happened to be 0, this would first try and divide by 0, and that would immediately crash the program, unless you were catching this exception somehow, with an except clause. This would cause a 0 division error, and your code would stop right there, right? So this is a much better way of writing it. So as I said, this is the basic concept. This example explains what happens with and then the question looked at what happens with OR. So let's take a look at the exact question, right? So again, someone wanted to know what is the value for M and N. So here we're just trying to comprehend this one line, and we're trying to say, okay, what are the values of M and N? We don't know, but the dangerous case would be if M is 0, because then we're trying to divide by 0. Writing it this way makes sure that we never divide by 0, right? The first way of writing it makes sure, because if M really was 0, this condition would be false, and then we would not even do the remainder calculation, right? So that is what it makes sense, right? So let's take a look at the question, and then we can make sure we have understood it, right? So here is some Python code, and then somebody is suggesting you can write it as return something, right? So instead of writing all these 9 lines of logic, or 8 or 9 lines of logic, you can write it in one line, return some expression. And the claim is that that is going to be much better, right? So Samadrit is saying, yeah, could the values of the variables be anything? See, when we write a function like this, or whatever it was in the previous example, right? We're saying this is going to work for any integer x and any integer y, right? Now, who knows what values this function is going to be called on. We are writing this function, and basically what are we saying when we're writing a function? We're saying, hey, we've got this calculation. It's a useful calculation. We're writing this logic out. Please use it, right? So for example, let's say Samadrit wrote this function and he's giving it to me. I'll say, thank you, Samadrit, right? Now I have this little function. I can use it now in my calculation. But since he has promised me that this works on any integer x and y, then I should be able to call it on anything, right? Maybe I'll call it on 0, negative integers, positive integers. He has promised me that it's going to work for any integer x and any integer y, right? So then I'm trusting him that I can call this function. So it's his responsibility as the programmer here to make sure that the code works sensibly, right? Now, maybe he wanted me to make only use it in some special cases. Then maybe he'll have a doc string over here saying, no, don't use this with negative numbers, or don't use it with 0 or something like that. And then I should probably be aware of that, right? But just written like this, the intention is that it could be used for any value. Okay. All right. Maybe I'm speaking a little bit too fast, right? Okay. So let me say it a little bit carefully. Let's focus on this question. Okay. And please do give me this feedback. Okay. I guess if I get very excited, I might speak fast. So I will speak carefully. Okay. So there is this function that's given. It has x and y. Both are integers, right? And we read this logic. We're trying to understand what it is doing. Okay. The question is saying this whole logic can instead be written very simply, return some expression. Okay. So what is the code trying to do? Firstly, if y is 0, then result is true, right? Remember, the answer is going to be either true or false. So if y is 0, result is true. If y is not 0, actually, they didn't even have to write this. They could have just said else, because either y is 0 or it's not 0. Remember, y is an integer. So an integer can either be 0 or not equal to 0. So they've written if y not equal to 0. It's not wrong, but it's not very good code. They could have just said else, right? So this is happening in the case when y is not 0. Okay. So if y is not 0, it's perfectly okay to take remainder with 0, remainder with y, because y is not 0. So then they check if x remainder y is equal to 0, then again the answer is true. Otherwise, the answer is false, right? So result is either set to true right away if y is 0. If y is not 0, then we calculate x remainder y, which is safe to do. It's not going to cause divide by 0. And then we either set the result to true or the result to false. And lastly, depending on whether we came to the if or the elif case, we will come out here and we will return that result. So we will either return true or we will return false, right? Now, out of the options that are given here, right, what can we see as dangerous, right? And we know that if y is 0, dividing by 0 is dangerous. So in both these first two options, we see that the first thing we do is x remainder y. And if y was 0, this code would crash. It would misbehave, right? So we can immediately rule this first option out, and we can immediately rule this second option out. So now we're left with these two options. In both these options, this happens later, right? Now, suppose it turns out y was really equal to 0. What would happen here? If y was really equal to 0, this sub-expression would evaluate to true. Now, remember what the short-circuiting logic is. If you can figure out the whole answer already over here, you don't evaluate the rest. That is short-circuiting. So if it's true, what is true or anything? True or anything is true, right? Go back and check, right? False and anything is false. True or anything is true, right? So the short-circuiting logic, which says stop evaluating as soon as you know the answer, that logic tells us that if y is 0, we will immediately stop calculation here, and we won't do divide by 0. Okay, so this logic will stop immediately, and it will return the value true. Luckily, that's exactly what this code is doing. If y is 0, we want the answer to be true, right? So this seems very promising, right? What about this option? if y is really 0, this is true. Now, true and anything, well, it depends on this other thing, right? So if y was 0, I would say, okay, this part is true, but then I will also try and evaluate this, because for and, both the conditions I'm checking. This one is true, but I also have to check this one. So now short circuiting doesn't save me. Here I would divide by 0, so I can rule this out. So I've already ruled out this. I've already ruled out the second one. I can rule out the last one. The only one that's left is here, right? Now, we didn't actually check if this condition was what they wanted, but it is in fact what they want, right? If the division, if the remainder is 0, we want the answer to be true. If the remainder is not 0, we want the answer to be false. So basically, we're just checking, is the remainder equal to 0? That answer is either true or false. So you see, this whole complicated code can be written very simply using this logic, right? So overall, we're checking, this function is checking, it's going to return true if either y is 0 or y is a factor of x, okay? Now, there was a great question that was asked earlier in the chat. Let's see, Vinayak asked, can this function be named is multiple, right? So Vinayak, now that we have kind of understood what the function is doing, can you actually tell us why is multiple? It sounds like a great name, but it's actually not a good name, right? Now that we know how the code works, can we say, I mean, let's maybe try and say, okay, can we use the name is multiple? So maybe Vinayak is thinking, right, maybe this function checks if x is a multiple of y, right? But I would like, ideally, Vinayak himself to tell us why that is actually not a good name. It's like one of those cases where it seems like a good idea. Then we think about it a little bit more and we said, no, no, not such a good idea, right? So it's great that this suggestion was made, because that's how we always think, right? We try ideas out and then we think, oh, no, 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 that doesn't work. Let me think of a better idea. Let me think of a better name, right? So Vinayak, if possible, if you can tell us why is multiple, while it seems like a good idea, is actually not a good name in this case. Okay? Now think about it. Samadri wants to know, what if true and x be equal to true? I couldn't quite understand, Samadri. If you can just try restating the question, maybe I'll better understand it, right? True and I see. You were asking for the previous slide. Why is it that true and x is true, right? No, true and x is not true. Um, False and x is always false, right? How does and work, right? This condition has to be true and this other condition has to be true. If one of the conditions is already false, definitely the answer is false. If I tell you one of the conditions is true, then you still have to look at the second condition, right? So true and x is x, right? Maybe that's what you said. Let me double check what you said, right? True and x is not true, but true and x is x, right? So I would have to look at x to figure out whether true and x is actually giving me anything, right? Right? It's like saying, what is 1 times x? Well, it depends on what x is, right? On the other hand, if I say what is 0 times x, I don't care what x is. 0 times x is going to be 0, right? So you see, sometimes it matters what x is, and sometimes it doesn't, right? Vinayak has tried, right? And this is really great, Vinayak, right? Like, firstly, it was a great suggestion. You came up with an idea. You shared your idea with all of us, right? And then I asked you a follow up, and it's okay. It's okay. We didn't come up with it, right? But I really want to see Vinayak has done something very brave here. And I want all of us, this is how we're going to learn, right? So Vinayak is going to learn the most from all of us, because Vinayak came up with the suggestion and then Vinayak has thought about it. He made the suggestion. I asked him, so he was the one thinking most hard about it. And he wasn't able to come up with it. It's no big deal, right? We will all have this kind of situation, but he really tried, right? And that's the most important thing here, right? So good job, right? Okay, I'll give you a clue, right? This code will check if y is 0. And if y is 0, this condition is true, and it will immediately return true. So no matter what x is, if I tell you y is 0, this function is going to return true. So now imagine, I'm calling the is multiple function with some value x and 0. And I'm asking it, is this value x a multiple of 0? And I know this function is always going to return true. So it's saying, like, no matter what x you give me, it will always be a multiple of 0. Right? And now I'm sure you can see that's going to be a problem, right? If I give it the value, let's say 5, 5 is not a multiple of 0. I don't care what we multiply 0 with, we're never going to get the value 5, right? So that will end up being a problem, right? So it usually works like is multiple, but for that case, right? So really good job. Well done. Okay. Okay. So that is the reason why is multiple seemed like a good idea, didn't work in this particular case. Okay. So that's really, I mean, Vinayak has given us a great model of how to think, right? And we shared these ideas with each other, and we this is how we learn, right? Okay, great. All right. Then there was a bunch of refute questions, right? And refute, if you think about it, I'm testing two abilities of yours, or helping you develop two abilities, right? One, you have to read the code. So some code is given in this refute question. It's counting some number of digits. You have to read the code. You have to read the task. And somehow the code is wrong, right? The question tells you, all these refute questions, they tell you that the code is buggy, right? So you have to read the code, read the task, and say, where is the difference, right? How come this code is buggy, right? And what is the task? Well, the name tells us what we're trying to do. The doc string tells us, the examples tell us, right? So all this information is given, like this is what the function is trying to do. And now on that basis, why is it that this code is wrong, right? Now, the way I will give these questions to you, if I do give you some doc tests, uh, you should try it out. But oftentimes you will see that the doc tests actually work, right? So 37 is supposed to produce the answer 2. What will this guy do? It will take the value 37, it will make it into a string. So now it will be the string 37, 37. And what is the length of that string? Obviously 2. It has 3 and 2, 3 and 7, right? So this num digits of 37 will return 2. Similarly, num digits of 100 will return 3, right? So it seems like this is perfectly fine, right? But and we can even try it on 33, right? 33 has 2 digits, right? Well, 33, this will convert 33 into the string 33, and it will return the length of that, right? And are the total number of digits in 33 2? Yeah, there's first 3 and the second 3. So the total number of digits is 2, right? So that seems to work. Okay. But if you try it out, or mentally trace it like we are doing, for -3, this won't work. How many digits are in -3? There's only one digit, the 3. But how will this code work? This will convert the -3 into a string, and that will include the minus sign when we calculate the length, right? So -3 is supposed to have only one digit, but this function will return 2, and that is how we refute it, right? So this one was hopefully straightforward. You tried it out. This one was a little bit tricky, right? So firstly, the function itself is more complicated. I know many of you are familiar with the definition of prime, but some of you would have to read the definition of prime to be clear, right? There was a question about are live classes recorded for final score? I'm not sure if you mean for studying for final exam. That I think the recording is available, right? So if I understood the correct question correctly, the live classes are being recorded, and I think you will have access to them. If your question was, will I be discussing something here that I can then ask in the final exam? Well, hopefully what we're discussing will be helpful to you, right? For the final exam, and more importantly, for your journey ahead with programming, I hope you will find these useful. Okay. Okay, so here again we have to look at the code, we have to look at the task and say how is it wrong, right? And if you read this logic, it's a little bit complicated, but basically you will see that it just does some very simple checks, right? So these first two lines basically check for the integers 2 and 3. You have to convince yourself smaller than 4, bigger than 1, and remember it's an integer. So the only integers that are bigger than 1 and less than 4 are 2 and 3, and both of those are prime numbers, right? So this expression will be true only for the integers 2 and 3. If I look at all the integers n that are less than 4, that includes things like 2 and 3, but it also includes things like 1 and 0 and negative numbers. But for 1 and 0 and negative numbers, this expression will not be true. So bottom line, these two statements are a clever way of saying if n is 2 or 3, then definitely the answer is true. Otherwise, if somehow n is less than 4, definitely the answer is false, right? So far we've only captured the prime numbers 2 and 3. And then we check, is it an even number? Is it divisible by 2 or divisible by 3? Then it's false. Why? Because numbers that are 4 or more, if those are divisible by 2, that means they're even numbers and they're not prime numbers. The only even number is 2, which we've already taken care of. And if it's divisible by 3 and it's not 3, then that's also not a prime number. If it is less than 11, right? So now if you think about it, the only numbers that are left here are the other small prime numbers 5 and 7, right? So those will be prime. Everything else that's less than 11 is not prime. And otherwise it checks this condition, right? So you'll have to take some time to read it, right? I would really like you to try and think about the logic here, try the various things. And for many examples that you will try, this will actually work just like the is prime function is supposed to work, right? But the problem is it only checks for divisibility by 2 and 3 and 5 and 7, right? And it doesn't check if the number has other prime factors, right? So if I look at say a number like let us say 77, right? 77, it will recognize it's not a prime number because it will realize that a 7 is a factor of 77, right? But if I look at not 7 times 11, but let's say 11 times 11, right? 11 times 11 is not a prime number. Obviously, it's got two factors. And that number, this thing will, it will not be able to find a factor, right? It won't find the factor 2, it won't find the factor 3, it won't find the factor 5, it won't find the factor 7. And so it'll say it is a prime number, right? You should check it on 121, right? And in fact, that is the smallest number on which this will fail, right? But this code will also fail on bigger numbers like 11 times 13 and 13 times 13 and other prime numbers, right? 17 times 17, all those it will fail on. The question wanted you to find the smallest positive integer, right, on which this code fails. And the smallest one it will fail on is 11 times 11. Why? Because this code only checked for divisibility by 2, 3, 5, and 7, right? So this question was tricky. This and the next one was following it up with, okay, if what is the smallest input? That is 121. And then for that 121, the expected answer is of course false, and this function will actually return true. If you try it out, it will return true. Of course, you also had the code check link to check your answer, right? So you saw that this question took some time. Okay. Now, going forward into assignments 4 and 5, I'm going to ask you fewer and fewer questions, right? We started with 15 questions in the first thing, and now we're down to 8 questions in this. Now we're going even smaller. So each one of the questions is going to take a little bit more time, right? And that's why I'm asking you fewer questions, right? Now, after the answer could be just like a multiple choice, right? So you can guess and check and see, but the real value you're going to get is to really think about these carefully, right? So I hope you will take these questions in the right spirit. I have spent quite a bit of time creating the questions, and I'm creating the questions to try and help you learn, right? So the most important thing is not to get the right answer, is to think about why it is that we're getting this answer, right? So I hope the review of quiz 3, assignment 3 made sense. And there was one question on the chat. Let me check that. Let's see. Somebody wants to know, let's say I have a variable v equal to 19.0 and a equal to 19.5. It looks like float in both cases. Is 19.0 a float or int? Okay, very good. So 19.0, Python says, because you put the 0.0, it's a float, right? But what is the value 19.0? Well, it's the same as the integer value 19. Okay. If you asked anyone who's not a programmer, hey, is 19.0 an integer? They'll say, yeah, of course, 19.0 is the integer 19, right? Its value is the same as the integer 19. If you think like on the number line, 19.0, that point is the same as the integer 19, right? So it's the same value. But as a Python programmer, if you tell me 19.0 is an int, that statement is not technically true because according to Python, 19.0 is a float, right? So I hope the distinction makes sense, right? Yes, and again, see, when we're talking as Python programmers, right? Now, Samadrit is a Python programmer, I'm a Python programmer, we are having a chat, and Samadrit says, 19.0 is a float. I say, no, 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 19.0 is an integer. What are you saying? He'll say, no, in Python, 19.0 is, because you put the point zero, Python will consider it a float. Okay, so again, you can try this out in the REPL, right? Maybe what I do is try it out in the REPL, right? So try something like this, right? Try what is type of 19.0. I'm putting this on the chat. Try that type of 19.0. It'll say float, right? But if you ask, is 19.0 the same as 19? That will say true. Okay, but this is only because sometimes you can have objects of different types that have the same value. That's possible. This is an example of those, right? Um, Dhanraj wants to know, and n less than 4 may be negative numbers also. Absolutely. And again, if you read the definition, it says prime numbers can't be negative, right? Prime numbers are positive integers that have certain properties, right? So for negative numbers, we want the answer to be false. So what will happen if n is a negative number? It's less than 4, but this condition will be false, right? Negative numbers don't satisfy this condition. So this expression will evaluate to false for negative n. And so this function will return false. And that is correct, right? Because negative numbers should be false according to the definition of prime numbers. They're not prime numbers. -3 is not a prime number according to this definition. Okay, so I hope that made sense. Again, a great question. Okay, so in the last few minutes that we have, I want to quickly look ahead to the next week's assignment. The material covers these helper functions and recursive functions. And recursion is this, this class ends at 45 minutes past, 12:45. So in a few minutes, 8 more minutes. So this idea of recursion, I tried explaining in the lecture. So it's basically, we want to write a helper function, but if the function can help itself, then that's what we call a recursive function. So it's a very simple idea conceptually. It's a very beautiful idea. Many people find it a little bit tricky, but if you understand the idea of a helper function, and that's why we had the examples earlier, then recursion is like just same idea in some sense, right? We have to always remember we have to write some base cases, otherwise we will get infinite recursion. I'm not going to go through this since this was explained in the lecture. I hope it was clear enough, right? So here again, I'm not going through all the questions. I'm just picking a few. So question 3 on the next week's quiz is again a refute problem. Therefore, again, it is code comprehension and task comprehension. So we're supposed to check if n is the square of some integer in the set 1, 2, 3 up to m. Right? So what does this mean? Let's look at an example. So if I'm asking is 4 the square of some integer in the range 1, 2, all the way up to 3. So 1, 2, dot, 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 3 is obviously just the set 1, 2, 3. So is 4 the square of 1 or the square of 2 or the square of 3? Yes, it is the square of 2, right? So that's why the answer is true. Now, is 9 the square of some integer in the range 1 up to 2? Now, 1 up to 2 is only 1 and 2, and 9 is neither 1 square nor is it 2 square, right? So therefore, the answer is false, right? Now, again, this code is trying to check this, right? And you have to try and refute it, right? This code, I promise you, is buggy. It looks like it's checking if n is equal to m squared, right? But it's not, right? The other thing to keep in mind, the function takes 2 arguments, n and m, and I'm telling you that n should be 9. So make sure that n is 9. Now, what is the value of m? for which this code fails, right? So in general, it could have failed for some other values of n and m, but for now, I want you to focus on n being 9 and just think about m. What could m be, right? Read the code, read the task, and try it out on code check. There was this question, right? So let's see. Your friend has written the following, right? Which of these indicates some sort of error, right? So in this code, there are some doc tests, right? And in case you want to try it out on doc tests, you might want to try it, say, on Python tutor and trace the code. Unfortunately, Python tutor doesn't support doc tests, right? So if you want to check, right, what does this fixed case function do on the string India wins written like this? Does it produce this because it's supposed to produce this? Here is what I suggest you do, right? Write it and copy paste the code in Python tutor, but Python tutor can't run the doc test, right? So what are we saying? We want fixed case of India wins to return this string. So we'll just call fixed case of India wins equals the string that we want, and we want to make sure that that value is true, right? This expression should be true. And the way we can say this is with what is called an assert statement. We're asserting, we're saying, I claim that fixed case of India wins returns this. Okay, that is my claim, that is my assertion. Now, what will happen in Python tutor? We will come to line 14. The function will be called. If it doesn't return the string that we're expecting, you'll see red arrows, red lines on this. It'll say assertion error, this failed. And then you know this doc test 1 has failed, right? Unfortunately, Python tutor doesn't run doc tests, so you can do it this way, right? You can just make a claim. Or, of course, you can just call this expression, maybe print it. You're expecting the answer to be true. If somehow after you print this expression, you see the value false, you'll know that the doc test 1 has failed, right? And similarly for doc test 2, right? So please try it out this way. Okay. In this last question here that I want to discuss, question 5, this is one of those questions where you have to ask clarifying questions, right? So the code check link allows you to ask clarifying questions. Here, I just wanted to make the point. I mean, the video talks about this, but it's super, super important, right? Especially now with Gen AI, like anybody can write code, right? The problem is people might be writing the code for the wrong question. People are not asking the client, what do you really want, right? So your ability to be a good programmer in this Gen AI world, it depends a lot on, can you make sure you've understood the question? Maybe the client hasn't explained fully what the question is, right? Now you can't say, oh God, what a silly client, this client is not telling me what they want, right? No, remember, you are going to be the programmer, right? So it is your responsibility to clarify, right? You can say to your client, look, I don't understand exactly. You can give examples to the client. Just like it's easy for us to understand by examples. We were talking earlier about code comprehension by example. Similarly, the client may be able to say, if you give an example, okay, what do you want me to do when n is -3? Do you want it to be a prime number or not a prime number, right? Like we were just discussing, right? You can clarify, right? So here I want you to come up with some questions, use the code check link, and based on that, what do you think the client wants? Does the client want this? Does the client want this? Try it out, right? So that's what these ask the client questions are trying to get at, right? Okay, so let's see. Samatrit wants to know, besides the normal Python packages, are there other packages that you can import? Yes, Python is amazing. It's got lots and lots of other packages. In this 8-week course, we're not going to be able to explore most of these things. Python tutor doesn't support too many things. Just keep it in mind. Like for doc tests, for example, you have to import this module for doc tests. It doesn't support it, right? But regular Python has a large number of packages, right? Um, okay, Arun wants to know about, can you do these assignments later, right? Arun, unfortunately, the NPTEL rules don't let us do this. But here is what I would like all of us to do, right? See, I know many of you would like to get the certificate and take the exams, etc. That is wonderful. But I hope all of you will find the assignments and the lectures useful for learning, right? So Arun, if you're interested in learning this material, please, save the questions, right? And by all means, try them in November. The course may not be able to give you a certificate or whatever, but you will learn, right? At the end of the day, please remember, your learning is the thing I'm most interested in. So if you are finding the materials useful, and you weren't able to find time, no problem, but please do try and save the assignment material, right? Don't lose that, and try it. As I said, we've worked very hard as a team to try and bring this material out for you. um, we hope you will find it of good quality, and we hope you will find it useful for your learning, right? That is our main goal here. Okay. All right. We're officially out of time. So those of you who have to drop out, please do drop out. I can stick around for a minute or so if anyone has any further questions. Happy to try and this thing, right? Right. How to download materials? I mean, you should probably be able through your browser. Worst case, you can copy paste it, but maybe you can do file print to PDF or something like that, right? So the quiz, for example, you can save it as a PDF or something like that, right? I mean, you guys are all probably much smarter than me. You can find other ways of doing this too. I mean, that's the first idea that came to my head. There's probably a smarter way of doing this, right? Okay. All right. So if there are no more questions, or let's see, the Chaitanya wants to know how to approach questions like question two, like doc streaming. Okay, this is a really good question. So let's go back to the. So this is the one with the joules and the calories and things like that, right? So let's see, where is that one, right? So this is great. Like how to approach these kinds of questions, right? Where is that one? This one, right? This one. Here we go. How to approach this, right? Okay. So as I said, hopefully in general, somebody has not given it the stupid name like F, right? Somebody's actually given us a sensible name. So here I've made it, I've deliberately made it harder because I've given it a nonsense name, right? But in general, the function is supposed to do something, right? We have to understand what it's trying to do, right? So I usually call this task comprehension, like figuring out what the task is, right? In this case, the task was not given clearly. It was just called function f. There was no doc string. So to figure out what the task was, we kind of had to read some documentation, right? So in this documentation, we say, okay, we can see it has something to do with this number 4.184. Why? Because we can see it here, right? So in general, there is going to be some connection between this documentation and the code we're trying to map to. And what we are demonstrating here is I can read this code. And this code I know is doing, in this case, division, right? So I'm trying to show that I understand what the code is doing, because based on this documentation, it must have been doing this kind of calculation, right? It's a bit of a weird problem, right? Hopefully nobody is going to give you such a task in the real world, right? Certainly, I hope nobody is going to call this function in a silly way like this, right? So I think if your question was really about, is this a super important skill? This is more like like a practice skill, right? If you want to be really super strong, you go to the gym and you practice and you pick weights and all this kind of thing, right? This is like a mental gym, right? It's like a practice question. It's not a real world question. So if you're thinking like, oh God, how am I going to solve this question in the real world? Maybe that's not this is not a super useful skill in that sense. Hopefully nobody will give you a task like that, right? So I hope that helped, right? It's not like I need you to have like a general strategy for solving this, right? It's more like a practice problem, right? Okay, yeah. All right. So I think, let's see, there's a few more questions. I'll just quickly answer those. I know we're out of time. So what's the docstring all about? Docstring is explained in the lecture notes, right? In the video, right? Asif wants to know, did all programming languages have issues with floating point and arithmetic representation? So that's a great question, Asif. So many programming languages use the same kind of floating point representation that Python uses. And so since that has an issue, um, many programming languages have that. In general, every programming language will have some issues. Why? Because there are an infinite number of real numbers and only finite amount of memory in any computer. So everybody will have some issue, right? So hopefully that makes sense, right? Yeah, this class is over. I will drop off. Thank you so much, and thank you to the NPTEL team. Thank you.